I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia Henderson marching across the parking lot toward my truck at 6:15 in the morning, her clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield, and her face twisted into that expression I had come to know all too well. My name is Adrian Xavier, and I have lived in the Pinewood Grove community in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina for 3 years. I work as an industrial mechanic at a manufacturing plant about 40 minutes away, and my shift starts at 7 sharp. That means I leave my house every weekday morning at 6:20, without fail. My routine has been the same since I moved in. Wake up at 5:30, shower, make coffee, drink said coffee while checking my phone, then head out to my 2019 Ford F-250 diesel truck to warm up the engine before the commute. Diesel engines, especially in the winter months, need time to warm up properly. It is not just about comfort, though I will admit that climbing into a warm truck on a January morning beats sitting in a freezing cab. It is about engine health, fuel efficiency, and longevity. A diesel engine that is started cold and immediately driven hard will wear out faster, burn fuel less efficiently, and potentially suffer damage to critical components. So every morning I would start my truck, let it idle for about 10 to 15 minutes while I finished getting ready, then head out. Nobody had ever complained about it before, not once in 3 years. My truck is not particularly loud when idling. Sure, you can hear it if you are nearby, but it is a low rumble, not the obnoxious revving of some teenager's modified Honda. My neighbors on either side had never mentioned it. The Robertsons on my left both worked from home and were usually still asleep when I left. The Chens on my right were early risers like me, and Mr. Chen would often wave at me from his kitchen window as he made his own morning coffee. But Patricia Henderson was not my neighbor. She lived 4 houses down and across the street, and she had been the HOA president of Pinewood Grove for the past 18 months. In that time, she had fined 17 different homeowners for various infractions ranging from the reasonable, like someone who had not mowed their lawn in 3 weeks, to the absolutely ridiculous, like the couple who got fined because their Halloween decorations were still up on November 2nd. "Mr. Xavier," Patricia called out as she approached, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She was 52 years old, with short blonde hair that looked like it had been styled with a weed whacker and designer athleisure, where that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. "We need to talk about your vehicle." I had just opened the driver's side door and was about to climb in. I turned to face her, already feeling my jaw tighten. "Good morning, Patricia. What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," she said, stopping about 5 feet away from me, "is that you have been idling your truck every single morning for an extended period of time. Multiple residents have complained about the noise and the exhaust fumes." I glanced around the parking lot. There was nobody else in sight. The sun was not even fully up yet, casting everything in that weird blue-gray pre-dawn light. Multiple residents. Who exactly has complained? Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. That information is confidential. The HOA does not disclose the identities of complainants. But I can assure you that the complaints are legitimate and numerous. "Numerous," I repeated, letting the skepticism drip from my voice. "Patricia, I have been doing this for 3 years. Why is it suddenly a problem now?" "Because I was not aware of it until recently," she said, as if that explained everything. "And now that I am aware, I have a responsibility to enforce our community standards. According to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Pinewood Grove HOA Covenant, residents are prohibited from creating excessive noise or air pollution that disturbs the peaceful enjoyment of the community. I had read the HOA covenant when I bought my house, like any reasonable person would. It was 73 pages of dense legalese that mostly boiled down to keep your house looking nice, and do not be a jerk to your neighbors. The section she was referencing was deliberately vague, probably intentionally so, which gave the HOA board wide latitude to interpret what constituted excessive noise or pollution. My truck idling for 15 minutes in the morning is not excessive, I said, keeping my voice level. It is a diesel engine. They need to warm up, and I am leaving for work at a reasonable hour, not idling at 3 in the morning. That is your opinion, Patricia said. The HOA board has reviewed the matter, and we have determined that your behavior violates community standards. You are hereby issued a warning. If you continue to idle your vehicle for more than 5 minutes, you will be fined $200 per occurrence. 5 minutes was not enough time, not even close. A diesel engine in January needed at least 10 to 15 minutes to reach optimal operating temperature. 5 minutes would barely get the cab warm, let alone the engine. This is ridiculous, I said. You cannot just make up arbitrary rules because you personally do not like something. I am not making up anything, Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. I am enforcing existing rules. You received your warning. If you choose to ignore it, you will face the consequences. She pulled a pre-printed form from her clipboard and held it out to me. This is your official written notice. You have been informed. I took the paper, mostly because I did not want her to keep standing there holding it out like some kind of bizarre standoff. The form had my name and address at the top, a box checked next to noise violation, and Patricia's signature at the bottom, along with the signatures of 2 other HOA board members I vaguely recognized. Fine, I said. I will take this up at the next HOA meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for February 15th, Patricia said. Until then, the warning stands. Have a nice day, Mr. Xavier. She turned and walked back across the parking lot, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the cold pavement. I stood there for a moment, holding the stupid warning notice, feeling my blood pressure rising. Then I climbed into my truck, which was now nice and warm, and drove to work. The thing about HOA disputes is that they almost never resolve themselves quickly or reasonably. I learned this over the next 2 weeks, as I tried to navigate the bureaucratic nightmare that Patricia and her board had created. I started by doing exactly what she had told me not to do. I continued warming up my truck every morning, because I was not about to let some power-hungry HOA president dictate how I maintained my vehicle. On the 3rd day after the warning, I found another notice taped to my front door when I got home from work. This one informed me that I had been fined $200 for violating the noise ordinance. The next morning, I warmed up my truck again. Another $200 fine. I paid the fines, because according to the HOA covenant, unpaid fines could accrue interest and eventually result in a lien being placed on my property. But I also started documenting everything. I took photos of my truck in the parking lot each morning, noting the time and temperature. I measured the noise level with a decibel meter app on my phone. At idle, my truck registered around 65 decibels from 10 feet away, which is roughly the same volume as a normal conversation, hardly excessive. I also started talking to my neighbors. Mr. Chen told me he had never been bothered by my truck and had no idea anyone had complained. The Robertsons said the same thing. I went door to door throughout the neighborhood, asking if anyone had an issue with my morning routine. Out of the 43 homes in Pinewood Grove, I spoke to residents at 37 of them. Not a single person said they had complained or were bothered by my truck, When I asked if anyone had complained to the HOA about anything I did, most people just shrugged or looked uncomfortable. But Mrs. Kowalski, an elderly woman who lived 2 streets over, leaned in close and whispered, "Patricia complains about everything, dear. She fined my son for parking his motorcycle in my driveway when he came to visit. Said it was an eyesore. The boy rode it from California to see me, and she tried to charge me $500. I attended the February 15th HOA meeting, armed with my documentation, my decibel readings, and a printed copy of North Carolina's state laws regarding noise ordinances, which specified that during daytime hours, residential noise up to 75 decibels was generally considered acceptable. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that mostly sat empty except for these monthly gatherings and the occasional kid's birthday party. About 20 residents showed up, which was more than usual. Word had gotten around that I was planning to challenge the fines. Patricia sat at the head table with the other 2 board members. Richard Vance, a retired insurance salesman who mostly just nodded along with whatever Patricia said, and Denise Morris, a real estate agent who seemed to spend most of the meetings checking her phone. I waded through the opening remarks, the approval of last month's minutes, and a tedious discussion about whether the community should plant new flowers around the entrance sign. Then, during the open forum section, I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Xavier," Patricia said, her tone suggesting she would rather eat broken glass than hear what I had to say. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "I want to appeal the fines I have been issued for warming up my vehicle in the morning. I have brought documentation showing that my truck's noise level is well within acceptable limits, both according to community standards and North Carolina state law. I have also surveyed the neighborhood, and not a single resident I spoke to has complained about my truck." I held up my folder of documentation. Patricia did not even glance at it. "Your appeal is noted and denied," she said. "The board has already reviewed this matter and made our decision. The fines stand." "You cannot just deny my appeal without looking at the evidence," I said, feeling my frustration building. "The board has the authority to make decisions regarding community standards," Patricia said. "Your evidence is irrelevant. You violated the rules, you were fined, and that is the end of it." "Now, if there is no further business, there is further business," said a voice from the back of the room. I turned and saw Mr. Chen standing up. "I would like to know who complained about Adrian's truck, because it was not me and I live right next to him." "Me neither," said Tom Robertson, standing up beside his wife. Patricia's face flushed red. "As I have already explained, the identities of complainants are confidential." "That is convenient," Mr. Chen said, "because I am starting to think nobody actually complained except you, Patricia." The room got very quiet. Patricia's flush deepened to almost purple. "How dare you," she said. "I have dedicated countless volunteer hours to improving this community, and this is the thanks I get. Baseless accusations." "Then show us the complaints," Tom Robertson said. "If they exist, prove it." "I do not have to prove anything to you," Patricia snapped. She gathered up her papers and stood. "This meeting is adjourned." She walked out of the clubhouse, leaving Richard and Denise sitting at the table looking uncomfortable. The meeting dissolved into chaos, with multiple people trying to talk at once. I left feeling like I had won a moral victory but lost the practical battle. The fine still stood, and I was now out $600 with no resolution in sight. Over the next week, I tried a different approach. I reduced my warm-up time to exactly 5 minutes, as Patricia had demanded. My truck still was not properly warmed up, and I could feel the engine struggling during the first few miles of my commute, but I was technically following the rules. Then the temperatures really dropped. Charlotte does not usually get brutally cold, but that February we had a cold snap that sent nighttime temperatures down into the teens. And that is when the battery problem started. I should explain something about car batteries. Cold weather is their natural enemy. The chemical reactions that produce electrical currents slow down in cold temperatures, which means a battery that works fine in the summer might struggle or die completely when it gets cold enough. This is especially true for older batteries or ones that are not properly maintained. Pinewood Grove had a lot of residents who drove older cars, and a lot of residents who were not particularly good at vehicle maintenance. So when the temperature dropped to 17 degrees on a Tuesday night, I was not surprised to find Mr. Chen knocking on my door at 6:30 Wednesday morning. "Adrian, I am so sorry to bother you," he said, looking embarrassed. "My car will not start. The battery is dead." "Do you have jumper cables?" I did, of course. I had a set in my truck along with a portable jump starter battery pack. I had helped probably a dozen neighbors jump start their cars over the past 3 years. It was just something you did when you lived in a community. Someone needed help, you helped them. "No problem," I said. "Let me grab my keys." I pulled my truck around to the Chen's driveway and popped the hood. Mr. Chen's Honda was indeed dead as a doornail. I hooked up the cables, waited a few minutes for the charge to transfer, and then his car started right up. "Thank you so much," Mr. Chen said. "I owe you one." "Do not worry about it," I said. "Just let it run for a while to recharge the battery." I was late to work that day because of the jump start, but I did not mind. Helping out a neighbor was more important than clocking in exactly on time. The next morning, it was even colder, 15 degrees. My phone started buzzing at 6 a.m. with a text from Karen Morrison, who lived 3 houses down from me on the opposite side from Patricia. "Adrian, huge favor to ask. My car battery died and I need to get to work. Can you help jump start it? We'll pay you." I texted back that she did not need to pay me and that I would be there in 5 minutes. By the time I got Karen's car started, it was 6:35. I was definitely going to be late to work. I texted my supervisor to let him know. At 6:50, I was halfway to the plant when my phone rang. It was Tom Robertson. "Adrian, man, I hate to ask, but both our cars are dead. Any chance you are still in the neighborhood?" I turned around. It took me until 7:45 to get both of the Robertsons' cars started. Their batteries were in really bad shape, and it took multiple tries. By that point, I had gotten 3 more texts from other neighbors asking for help. I called into work and told them I would not be in until afternoon. Then I spent the next 2 hours driving around Pinewood Grove with my jump starter, helping people get their cars running. By the time I was done, I had helped 9 different households. The cold snap lasted for 5 days. Each morning, I would wake up to multiple messages from neighbors asking for help with dead batteries. I started leaving for work at 5:30 just so I would have time to make the rounds before heading to the plant. My supervisor was not thrilled about my irregular arrival times, but he understood the situation. What I did not realize until later was that Patricia Henderson also had a car with a dying battery. Her Mercedes SUV, which she was apparently very proud of, had a battery that was on its last legs. And on the Saturday morning of that cold week, when the temperature hit a record low of 12 degrees, her battery finally gave up. I was in my kitchen making breakfast when I heard the knocking. Not a polite knock, but an aggressive pounding that made my front door rattle. I opened the door to find Patricia standing there, still in her bathrobe and slippers, her face red from either cold or anger, possibly both. "I need you to jump start my car," she said, not asked. Demanded. I stared at her for a moment, processing the sheer audacity. This was the woman who had fined me $1,200 over the past month for warming up my truck. The woman who had dismissed my appeal without even looking at my evidence. The woman who had made my life miserable over something completely reasonable. "No," I said. Patricia's eyes widened. "Excuse me," I said. "No, I'm not going to help you." "But your truck is right there," she said, pointing at my F-250 in the parking lot. "You have jumper cables. It will take 5 minutes." "Then I am sure you can find someone else to help you," I said. "Good luck." I started to close the door. Patricia jammed her foot in the doorway. "You have been helping everyone else in the neighborhood all week. You cannot refuse to help me." "Actually, I can," I said. "You are not entitled to my time or my equipment. And given that you have spent the past month harassing me with bogus fines, I think we are well past the point of neighborly favors." "This is because of the fines." Patricia's voice went up an octave. "You are punishing me because I enforced community standards." "I am not punishing you," I said calmly. "I am simply choosing not to help you. There is a difference. Now please move your foot." Patricia jerked her foot back and I closed the door. I watched through the window as she stood on my porch for another few seconds, apparently trying to decide if she should knock again. Then she stormed back across the parking lot to her house. I felt a small, petty sense of satisfaction. It was not much, but it was something. 20 minutes later, Mr. Chen texted me. "Did Patricia just ask you for help with her car?" "Yes," I replied. "I told her no." "Good. She just knocked on my door asking for jumper cables. I told her mine were not working." Over the next hour, I got texts from 4 other neighbors. Patricia had apparently gone door to door asking for help, and word had spread about what she had done to me with the fines. The neighborhood had collectively decided that Patricia could solve her own problems. By noon, I saw a tow truck pull into the community. It drove to Patricia's house, and I watched from my window as a technician jump-started her Mercedes, and then, apparently, sold her a new battery that he installed on the spot. The whole operation probably cost her around $200. I felt absolutely no sympathy. The following week, the weather warmed back up to normal February temperatures, which in Charlotte means the 40s and 50s. The battery crisis passed, and life in Pinewood Grove returned to its normal rhythm. I continued warming up my truck for exactly 5 minutes, not a second more. I set a timer on my phone to make sure. And every single morning, like clockwork, I got a reminder that Patricia Henderson was watching. She started taking photos of my truck. I would see her standing in her driveway with her phone, pointing it at my vehicle, documenting every instance of idling. It was creepy and obsessive, but I made sure to stay within her stupid 5-minute rule. On a Thursday morning in early March, I was walking out to my truck when I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. Patricia was standing next to her Mercedes, which was parked in her driveway, and she was warming it up. The exhaust was clearly visible in the cold air, and I could hear the engine running from across the parking lot. I checked my watch. 6:18 a.m. I pulled out my phone and started recording video. Patricia got back into her car at 6:33. 15 minutes of idling, 3 times longer than her own stupid rule. I saved the video and went to work with a spring in my step. At the next HOA meeting in March, during the open forum, I requested the floor. "I would like to report a violation of community standards," I said, looking directly at Patricia. "A resident has been idling their vehicle for 15 minutes each morning, which exceeds the 5-minute limit that the board has established. I have video documentation." I pulled out my phone and played the video on the screen. Patricia's face went from normal to pale to red in about 3 seconds. "That is different," she sputtered. How? I asked. How is it different? My vehicle requires a longer warm-up period, Patricia said. It is a more sophisticated engine. The room erupted in laughter. Even Richard Vance looked like he was trying not to smile. So sophisticated engines get an exception, I said. Interesting. My diesel truck, which costs $65,000 and has actual engineering reasons for requiring a warm-up period, gets fined. But your Mercedes gets a pass. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I am the HOA president. I do not have to justify my decisions to you. Actually, you do, said a voice from the back. It was Linda Kowalski, the elderly woman whose son had been fined for the motorcycle. That is the whole point of the board. You serve the community, not yourself. I move that we vote to remove Patricia Henderson as HOA president, Mr. Chen said, standing up. Second, said Tom Robertson immediately. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. You cannot do that. There are procedures. This is not how it works. But it was how it worked. According to the HOA bylaws, any board member could be removed by a 2/3 vote of the community. Denise Morris, who had been silent through the whole exchange, suddenly found her voice. All in favor of holding a special election to remove Patricia Henderson from the position of HOA president, please raise your hand. Nearly everyone in the room raised their hand. Out of 23 residents present, only 2 did not vote in favor, and one of those was Richard Vance, who looked torn between loyalty to Patricia and his own common sense. Patricia grabbed her papers and her purse. Fine. You want to run this community into the ground without proper leadership. Go ahead, I resign. She stormed out of the clubhouse for the second time in as many months. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Denise cleared her throat. Well, she said, I suppose we need to elect a new president. Mr. Chen was elected as the interim president, with a promise to hold a proper election at the next meeting. The first order of business was reviewing all of the fines Patricia had issued in the past year. It turned out that Patricia had collected over $34,000 in fines from various residents over the course of her presidency. Some of them were legitimate, like the guy who had painted his house bright purple without approval. But most of them were petty, vindictive, and completely unjustified. The board voted to refund any fines that were deemed unreasonable, which included all of my warm-up fines. I got my $1,200 back, along with an official apology from the board. Life in Pinewood Grove got significantly better after that. Mr. Chen was a reasonable president who focused on actual community improvements rather than trying to micromanage everyone's lives. The monthly meetings became productive instead of contentious. Patricia, for her part, became noticeably less visible in the neighborhood. She stopped attending HOA meetings and rarely left her house except to go to work or run errands. I saw her occasionally in passing, and she would always look away quickly, as if making eye contact would somehow wound her pride even further. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In early April, I noticed something strange. My truck had been parked in the same spot overnight, but when I came out in the morning, there was a small scratch on the driver's side door that had not been there before. It was not a huge scratch, just a thin line about 4 inches long, but it bothered me because I take good care of my truck. I checked my dash cam, but it only recorded when the engine was running or if it detected a significant impact. There was nothing on the footage. 3 days later, I found another scratch, this time on the passenger side. I mentioned it to Mr. Chen, who frowned. That is weird. Have you checked if anyone else is having similar problems? I asked around. The Robertsons had not noticed anything. Neither had the Morrisons or anyone else I talked to. Just my truck. The scratches kept appearing. Small ones, barely noticeable unless you were looking for them, but they were there. After the fifth occurrence, I decided to set up a real camera. I bought a motion-activated security camera and mounted it on a stake hidden in the landscaping, pointed at where I parked my truck. 2 nights later, the camera caught Patricia Henderson sneaking out of her house at 2:30 in the morning, creeping over to my truck, and deliberately scratching it with what looked like a key. I watched the footage 3 times, making sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. Then I saved the video file to multiple locations and called the non-emergency police line. The officer who responded to my house the next morning was a young guy named Officer Ramirez. He looked at the camera footage, took photos of all the scratches on my truck, and wrote up a report. "This is pretty clear-cut vandalism," he said. "We will follow up with Miss Henderson and see what she has to say." I also filed a claim with my insurance company and got an estimate for repairing all the scratches. The total came to $1,800. Officer Ramirez returned the next day with an update. We spoke to Miss Henderson. She denied everything at first, but when we told her we had video evidence, she admitted to it. She said you had been harassing her and ruining her reputation in the neighborhood, and she wanted to get back at you. "I have not harassed her once," I said, feeling my anger rising. "I just refused to help her with her car battery and showed that she was a hypocrite at an HOA meeting." "That is what we figured," Officer Ramirez said. "She has been charged with misdemeanor vandalism. You will need to appear in court if you want to pursue restitution." I absolutely wanted to pursue restitution. The court date was set for May 20th. In the meantime, Patricia was apparently having a rough time. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what she had done, and whatever remaining sympathy anyone might have had for her evaporated. People actively avoided her. When she walked through the parking lot, conversations would stop until she passed. She put her house up for sale in late April. I was not surprised. The court hearing was brief and anticlimactic. Patricia showed up with a lawyer who tried to argue that the vandalism was a result of emotional distress caused by my refusal to help her, which was apparently supposed to make it okay. The judge was not impressed. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," the judge said, looking at Patricia over his reading glasses. "You fined Mr. Xavier for warming up his vehicle, then asked him to help you with your car, and when he refused, you vandalized his property." "It is more complicated than that," Patricia's lawyer began. "It really is not," the judge interrupted. "Miss Henderson, you are ordered to pay restitution to Mr. Xavier in the amount of $1,800 for vehicle repairs, plus court costs. You are also placed on 6 months probation. If you have any further contact with Mr. Xavier or his property, you will face additional charges. Do you understand?" Patricia nodded, looking like she wanted to melt into the floor. I got my check for the repairs within 2 weeks. Patricia's house sold in June, and she moved out on a quiet Tuesday morning while most people were at work. I did not see her leave, but Mr. Chen texted me a photo of the moving truck pulling away. The new neighbors who moved into Patricia's old house were a young couple with a baby. They were friendly, quiet, and had no interest in serving on the HOA board. Perfect neighbors, in other words. I continued warming up my truck every morning, but the new HOA board had quietly removed the 5-minute restriction. Mr. Chen, in his practical wisdom, had pointed out that the restriction was unenforceable and unreasonable, and the community had agreed. As long as nobody was revving their engine at 3 in the morning or idling for hours on end, warm up your vehicle however you needed to. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons about living in an HOA community. First, get to know your neighbors and build good relationships, because those relationships matter when conflicts arise. Second, Document everything, because you never know when you will need evidence to back up your position. Third, know your rights and the actual rules, not just what someone in authority tells you the rules are. And fourth, sometimes standing up for yourself means saying no, even when it is easier to just go along. I still help neighbors with jump starts when they need it, though thankfully we have not had another cold snap like that February. I still drive my diesel truck to work every morning, and I still warm it up properly, because taking care of your equipment is just common sense. And every time I start my engine in the morning and hear that diesel rumble, I think about Patricia Henderson taking photographs with her phone, her face pinched with self-righteous anger, convinced that she was enforcing important rules that kept the community safe and orderly. I think about her scratching my truck in the middle of the night, so consumed by petty revenge that she committed a crime over a neighbor dispute. The thing about power is that it reveals who people really are. Some people get a small amount of authority and use it to help others, to make their community better, to solve problems. Other people get that same authority and use it as a weapon, wielding rules like clubs to beat down anyone who does not comply with their personal preferences. Patricia Henderson was the second type, and in the end, that is what destroyed her position in our community. Not my refusal to help her with her car battery, not the video of her warming up her own vehicle, but her own inability to see past her ego and admit when she was wrong. Mr. Chen turned out to be exactly the kind of HOA president the community needed. Under his leadership, Pinewood Grove actually became a nicer place to live. He focused on things that mattered, organizing neighborhood barbecues and improving the common areas and mediating disputes with patience and fairness. He served for a full 1-year term and then stepped down, saying he had done what he set out to do. The next president was Linda Kowalski's daughter, who had moved into her mother's house to help take care of her. She was equally reasonable and practical. Pinewood Grove had apparently learned its lesson about giving authority to people who just wanted to feel important. As for me, I just kept living my life, working my job, maintaining my truck, being a decent neighbor. That is really all I ever wanted to do in the first place. One morning in late August, I was warming up my truck, now back to my normal 10 to 15-minute routine, when I noticed Mr. Chen walking over. He had his own coffee mug in hand and a smile on his face. "Morning, Adrian," he said. "Morning, Mr. Chen. How is it going?" "Good, good." "I just wanted to say thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For standing up to Patricia last winter. I know it cost you a lot of money and stress, but it needed to happen. She was making everyone miserable, but most of us were too conflict-averse to do anything about it. You forced the issue, and the community is better for it." I shrugged. I was just tired of being pushed around over something stupid. "Well, your stubbornness paid off." He raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. "Here is to warm engines and reasonable HOA boards." I clinked my travel mug against his. "I will drink to that." He headed back to his house, and I climbed into my truck, which was now perfectly warmed up. The engine purred smoothly as I put it in gear and headed out for my morning commute. The drive to work had become pleasant again. No stress about whether I was going to get another fine. No anger simmering under the surface. No dread about checking my front door for violation notices. Just a normal commute, like it always should have been. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered where she had moved to, whether she had learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like that rarely do. They just find new situations where they can exert control and repeat the same patterns. But that was not my problem anymore. As I merged onto the highway, surrounded by the usual morning traffic of people heading to their jobs, I felt genuinely content. My neighborhood was peaceful. My relationships with my neighbors were solid, and I could warm up my damn truck without anyone giving me grief about it. Sometimes the victories in life are not big and dramatic. Sometimes they are just getting back to normal, back to the simple ability to live your life without unnecessary interference. That does not make them any less worth fighting for. The manufacturing plant where I worked was busy that day. We had a big order to fulfill, and everyone was hustling to meet the deadline. I spent 8 hours troubleshooting machinery, replacing worn parts, and keeping the production line running smoothly. It was good, honest work, the kind that left me physically tired but mentally satisfied. When I got home that evening, I saw the Chens outside watering their garden. The Robertsons were washing their car. A couple of kids were riding bikes in the parking lot, their parents watching from nearby porches. It looked like a normal, healthy neighborhood, like it should be. I parked my truck and headed inside, already thinking about dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Robertson asking if I wanted to come to a barbecue they were hosting on Saturday. I replied that I would be there. This was what community was supposed to be. People living their lives, helping each other when needed, respecting boundaries, and not sweating the small stuff. No petty power plays, no vindictive fines, no midnight vandalism. Just normal, decent people being neighbors. I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, went through my routine, and headed out to my truck at 6:20. I started the engine and let it warm up for 12 minutes while I checked the news on my phone. Nobody complained. Nobody took photos. Nobody left violation notices on my door. And that really is where the story ends. Not with some dramatic confrontation or courtroom showdown, but with quiet normalcy. With the restoration of the simple right to warm up my truck in the morning without being harassed for it. Patricia Henderson had tried to use her position to control something that was never hers to control. She had manufactured a problem where none existed, created conflict where there should have been peace, and ultimately paid the price for it. Not just in the criminal vandalism charge and the restitution she had to pay, but in her reputation and her place in the community she had tried to rule. I learned something from the whole experience, too. I learned that sometimes the right response to unreasonable demands is simply to say no. Not to argue endlessly, not to try to convince the other person they are wrong, but just to refuse to comply and accept the consequences. I learned that documentation and evidence matter more than arguments and emotions. And I learned that most people, when it comes down to it, are reasonable and decent, and they will support you if you are in the right. The HOA system is not inherently bad. In theory, it is a good way for communities to maintain standards, organize improvements, and resolve disputes. But like any system, it is only as good as the people running it. Put someone like Patricia in charge, and it becomes a tool for petty tyranny. Put someone like Mr. Chen in charge, and it becomes a genuine asset to the community. I have no plans to move out of Pinewood Grove. Despite everything that happened, I like my house, I like my neighbors, and I like the area. Charlotte is a good city to live in, with a solid economy, decent weather, and plenty to do. The HOA drama was an aberration, not the norm, and it has been resolved. Every morning, I still start my truck at 6:20. I still let it warm up for 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the temperature. I still listen to that diesel engine rumble and feel satisfied knowing I am taking proper care of my vehicle. And I still drive to work without any anxiety about what stupidity might be waiting for me when I get home. That is victory. Not the big, flashy kind that makes for exciting stories, but the quiet, sustainable kind that lets you live your life in peace. And honestly, that is the best kind there is. The Saturday barbecue at the Robertsons was well attended. About 15 neighbors showed up, including Mr. Chen and his wife, the Morrisons, Linda Kowalski and her daughter, and several others I knew by sight but not well. We ate burgers and hot dogs, drank beer and soda, and talked about normal neighbor stuff. Someone was remodeling their bathroom. Someone else was thinking about adopting a dog. The community entrance sign needed new flowers planted around it. Nobody mentioned Patricia Henderson. It was like she had never existed, her brief reign as HOA president already fading into communal memory. In a year, the newer residents probably would not even know who she was. That is how it should be. People who abuse power should be forgotten, their actions serving only as cautionary tales to prevent future abuses. The focus should be on the present and future, on building a community worth living in. As the sun set and people started heading home, Tom Robertson pulled me aside. "Hey, I never properly thanked you for helping with our cars during that cold snap," he said, "and for dealing with all of Patricia's nonsense. You could have just paid the fines and kept your head down, but you stood up for what was right. That meant something." "I appreciate that," I said. "But honestly, I was just tired of being pushed around." "Well, we are glad you pushed back," he clapped me on the shoulder. "Same time next month I will be here." I walked back to my house as the last light faded from the sky, feeling genuinely good about where I lived and the people around me. It had taken some conflict to get here, some stress and money and frustration, but we had come out the other side better for it. My truck sat in its usual parking spot, clean and well-maintained, ready for another week of reliable service. I ran my hand along the side panel where Patricia's scratches had been, now perfectly repaired and invisible. The body shop had done excellent work. Inside my house, everything was quiet and comfortable. I had a beer, watched a movie, and went to bed satisfied with how things had turned out. Monday morning came around, and I followed my usual routine. 5:30 wake up, shower, coffee, check phone, head out to truck at 6:20. Start engine, let it warm up, drive to work. The rhythm of it was soothing, the predictability comforting. At work, my supervisor called me into his office during lunch break. "Hey, Adrian, I wanted to talk to you about those mornings you came in late back in February," he said. My stomach tightened. Was this going to be a problem now, months later? "The company wanted me to give you this," he continued, handing me an envelope. "It is a bonus. We heard about what you were doing, helping all your neighbors with their car batteries on your own time, making yourself late to help other people. That is the kind of character we value here." I opened the envelope. It contained a check for $500 and a letter thanking me for exemplifying the company's values of community service and reliability. I honestly did not know what to say. "Thank you. That was not necessary." "Maybe not, but we wanted to do it anyway. Keep up the good work." I walked back to my station feeling like the universe had finally balanced itself out. All the fines, the stress, the vandalism, the court case, it had all resolved in my favor. Not through luck or connections, but through simply standing firm on what was reasonable and right. The rest of the workday passed quickly. When I got home that evening, I saw a notice posted on the community bulletin board announcing that the annual Pinewood Grove neighborhood yard sale would be held in 3 weeks. It was something Patricia had always opposed, saying it made the community look trashy. Mr. Chen had reinstated it during his term, and it had been a huge success. I made a mental note to clean out my garage and see what I could sell. Might as well participate in community events. The next 3 weeks passed without incident. Work was steady, weather was nice, life was good. The yard sale came and went successfully. I made about $200 selling old tools and equipment I was not using anymore, and I bought a vintage toolbox from Mr. Chen that was in great condition. Summer turned to fall. The leaves on the trees around Pinewood Grove started changing colors, creating a beautiful display of reds and golds. The temperature dropped enough that I needed to start warming up my truck again in the mornings, though not as extensively as in winter. Nobody complained. Nobody fined me. Nobody took photos. It was glorious. In October, I got a letter in the mail from Patricia Henderson's lawyer. My first thought was that she was trying to sue me or appeal the restitution or something equally ridiculous. But when I opened it, I found something unexpected. It was a settlement offer. Patricia was offering to pay me an additional $1,000 in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement about everything that had happened. She did not want me talking about the incident, posting about it online, or mentioning her name in connection with it. I called Mr. Chen and asked his opinion. "Take the money," he advised. "You were not planning to blast her online anyway, right? Might as well get paid for your silence." He had a point. I was not a vindictive person. I did not want to ruin Patricia's life. I just wanted her out of mine. An extra $1,000 would be nice, and signing a paper saying I would not trash talk her publicly cost me nothing. I signed the agreement and got the check. Between the restitution, the work bonus, and the settlement, I had actually come out financially ahead of where I had been before the whole mess started. Not that it was about the money. It was about principle, about not letting someone abuse their authority to push me around. But I was not going to complain about ending up with extra cash either. November arrived, bringing cooler weather and the approach of the holidays. The HOA board announced plans for a community Thanksgiving potluck, and surprisingly, over 30 families signed up to participate. Patricia had never organized community social events, seeing them as unnecessary and a waste of HOA resources. The new leadership saw them as exactly what the community needed. The potluck was held in the clubhouse on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. The place was packed with people, food, and conversation. Kids ran around playing while adults chatted and ate. It felt like a real community, the kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors and looked out for each other. I brought a large pan of mac and cheese and a case of beer. Both were gone within an hour, which I took as a sign of success. Linda Kowalski's daughter, who was now HOA president, made a short speech thanking everyone for coming and talking about how grateful she was to be part of such a wonderful community. She did not mention the drama from earlier in the year, but everyone knew what she was really saying. We got through that rough patch, and we are better now. December brought the first real cold snap of winter, though nothing like the brutal temperatures from the previous February. My truck needed longer warm-up times again, and I gave it whatever time it needed without a second thought. The freedom to do something so simple without fear of reprisal felt like a luxury, though it should have just been normal. Christmas decorations went up around the neighborhood. Some people went all out with lights and inflatable snowmen and musical displays. Others kept it simple with just a wreath on the door. Nobody got fined for having too many decorations or not enough or keeping them up too long after the holiday. The HOA board had better things to worry about, like organizing the annual Holiday Lights contest and planning for spring landscaping improvements. I put up a modest display myself. Some lights around my front door and windows, a small Christmas tree visible through the front window. Nothing fancy but festive enough. On Christmas Eve, I woke up to find a gift basket on my doorstep. It contained cookies, candy, a bottle of wine, and a card signed by about 20 different neighbors. The message was simple. "Thank you for being a great neighbor. Merry Christmas." I am not ashamed to admit that I got a little choked up reading it. The whole nightmare with Patricia had started because I was just trying to maintain my vehicle properly. It had escalated into fines and vandalism and court cases. But it had ended with my community showing me genuine appreciation and support. That is what matters in the end. Not the conflict, but how you come out of it. Not the people who try to tear you down, but the people who build you up. I spent Christmas Day with my family in Raleigh, about 2 hours away. When I told them the whole story about the HOA drama, they were alternately outraged on my behalf and amused by the absurdity of it all. My brother, who works in real estate law, confirmed that I had handled everything correctly from a legal standpoint. You documented everything, you followed the proper procedures, and you did not retaliate inappropriately, he said. A lot of people in your situation would have done something stupid that would have made their legal position worse. You played it smart. I had not thought of it as playing anything. I had just been trying to do what was right, but I appreciated his professional validation. The new year arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility. Pinewood Grove had fully moved past the Patricia era. The community was thriving under reasonable leadership. People were engaged and happy. The HOA actually functioned the way it was supposed to, serving the community rather than ruling over it. And every morning I warmed up my truck, drove to work, and lived my life in peace. That is all I ever wanted. That is all any of us should want. The freedom to live reasonably without unnecessary interference. The story could have ended badly. I could have let Patricia's fines and harassment drive me to do something foolish. I could have fought back in ways that would have made me look like the villain. I could have just paid the fines and suffered in silence, letting the injustice stand. But I did not do any of those things. I stood my ground, documented the truth, and let the system work the way it is supposed to. And in the end, justice prevailed. Not quickly, not easily, but genuinely. That is the real lesson here. When you are in the right, when you are being reasonable and someone else is not, stand your ground. Do not back down just because it is uncomfortable or costly in the short term. Document everything, follow proper procedures, and trust that eventually the truth will win out. It does not always work that way. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes bad people get away with bad behavior. Sometimes standing up for yourself costs more than you can afford to pay. I was lucky in a lot of ways. I had good neighbors who supported me. I had the financial resources to pay the fines while fighting them. I had video evidence of Patricia's vandalism. Things could have gone differently, but they did not. And now, every morning when I start my truck and hear that diesel engine rumble to life, I am reminded that sometimes doing the right thing actually does pay off. Sometimes standing up to bullies actually does stop them. Sometimes communities actually do come together to reject unreasonable behavior and support decent people. Pinewood Grove is not perfect. No community is. We still have occasional disputes, minor annoyances, the usual friction that comes from people living in close proximity. But we have reasonable people in charge now, people who understand that the goal is not control but harmony, not power but service. And I have my mornings back. My simple, peaceful mornings, warming up my truck before heading to work, starting each day without stress or conflict. It seems like such a small thing, but it is not. It is everything. That is where this story really ends. Not with Patricia moving away or the court case or the settlement check, but with the restoration of normal life. With the ability to warm up my truck in peace, help my neighbors when they need it, and live in a community that functions the way it should. Sometimes the greatest victory is just getting back to normal. And sometimes that is enough.